This is not the Spider-Man I remember, but hey, we'll take it. Meet Rick. Wait a minute. Anyway, Rick was late for school. One day his face was red and sweaty as he sprinted after the bus. His heart was pounding in his chest, but he didn't give up. But then, just as he made it, Rick stumbled into the stop sign. And another one. He tried to compose himself, but before long, he found himself smacked by the door. Talk about a lackluster entrance. When Rick entered the school bus, he was greeted by a sea of students, but as he walked down the aisle, no one wanted to sit next to him, not even the ugly chicks, and he spotted his friend Trey. While they chatted, Rick looked back at his crush Jael, who was sitting across from them with her Chad boyfriend Trey, told him to cut out and stop staring at her. He said he couldn't get Jill because he wasn't the right group. You know how there's nerds, emos, jocks, and the mafia members. Unfortunately for Rick, he wasn't in the popular crew. Rick and his class go on a field trip to a science lab that specializes in genetic modification. As they're walking in, he spots Jill talking to a bird. He walks over and makes a fool of himself. Boy, got no game. Perhaps he'll have better luck with the other bird. He goes to take a picture of it, but just then the science guy says no flash photography is allowed. Oh, Rick's flash goes off, and the bird spontaneously combusts. Turns out one side effect of its genetic modifications was sensitivity to light. Jill turns around, but along with everyone else, she doesn't notice. Still, though there's a fire be put out, Rick does his best, but ends up launching it at Jill's boyfriend Lance. He tries to pick a fight with Rick, pushing him. Joe comes to his rescue, but Lance isn't ready to give up just yet. He prepares to punch Rick when a hand grabs him from behind. It's the CEO of the science company, or as Lance knows him, Uncle Lou. After calming down, his knucklehead nephew Lou greets the students and coughs into a napkin. There's blood on it. Rick notices and asks if he's okay. Lou says yes, it's the good kind of cough, blood. Of course, Rick properly introduces himself, and Lou recognizes the name. He knew his parents, his mother in particular. He asks how they are, but Rick reveals they pass away. Aside from that, they're fine. We cut to a look at some so-called super dragonflies. Inquisitive Gil takes a closer look and notes that one is missing. It flies over to Rick, who is, for whatever reason, battling a raccoon. Then the dragonfly bites him. Look, it ain't a spider, but it'll have to do. Rick stumbles home, and he's looking awful. His uncle reminds him to feed the fish, but Rick vomits in the fish tank. I guess that counts. He makes it to his room, and his uncle follows him. Uncle Albert reads out from a book about puberty and notes that mood swings are common as our monthly leading weight. This isn't the right book. Rick falls back in bed and passes out. Meanwhile, L's company's undergoing scrutiny from its board of directors. One man stands in front of a painting of Lou talking all kinds of smack about him. Suddenly, Lou walks out of the painting, and around the corner the man is left flabbergasted as Lou walks into the room. He shares the board. His new invention will save the company and his life. That's right, Lou only has 1 hour left to live. Here's an hourglass to prove it. Oh, moving on, he gets in the machine, and it seems to be working, but then it breaks down. One board member walks up and basks and Lou's demise at that moment. Lou grabs the man and sucks out his life force. Guess the experiment was a success. After all, Lou is now a bona fide supervillain. He breaks free from his restraints and begins attacking everyone else who's there. Back at home, Rick Googles his symptoms when he suddenly receives a friend request from Professor X. He tells Rick that he has the answers he needs. Then he gets up and reminisces about his dad. He just can't believe he's gone. He thought he'd live forever. Later, Rick and his class attend the science fair, and there's a special guest. The inspirational Stephen Hawking arrives and lays down some wisdom on the kids. He breaks down the fact that he's actually extremely depressed and wishes he could walk around and do all the things they can do. Everyone is shook. Meanwhile, Rick stares at Jill as he walks. Time seems to slow down. Oh, he bumps into Lance, who warns him to watch where he's slow-mo walking. That's fair. Rick goes to get a sip of water, but finds his hands have become stuck. Upon closer inspection, he finds that they've become sticky and hairy. So nothing's out of the ordinary. Now, just to get that other hand free, oh no, he smacked Lance. A slow-mo fight breaks out with Rick expertly dodging Lance's punches. Or not, he gets sent flying into Stephen Hawking's. Oh God, not the bees. A total frenzy has broken out, and Rick is not about to stick around. He'd rather run outside and stick to some walls as he climbs. Inspiration strikes, and he begins to break it down. Suddenly spots an old lady on the road as a broken truck is barreling down toward her. Without thinking, Rick throws himself between the woman and the truck and pushes her out of harm's way. A crowd of onlookers. Foreman applauds his heroic act and congratulates him on being such a good Samaritan. Rick smiles at them, then turns around to look for the woman, and he pushed her and her dog into a wood. Sure, oh my God. After Rick goes home and receives a very sharp greeting from his uncle. Fortunately, catches it. Uncle Albert and Trey are shook, but Rick explains it away. It's easier than it looks, he says. Albert puts the theory to the test, shooting Trey, who reacts significantly slower. Well, the cat's out of the bag, or should I say the dragonfly. Rick definitely has superpowers, but just to be extra sure, Albert stabs him. My goodness, good thing that didn't work. Albert and Trey are excited for Rick, but he starts whining about things he never wanted these powers. Albert reminds him that his parents wanted greatness for him. We cut to the night of their passing. They had just left an opera and were walking down a sketchy alley with the dog doing. Rick's dad tells him that one day people are going to look to him to be a hero, and when that day comes he must be ready. However, Rick never expected that day to be now. A rover apprehends his dad, and Rick decides to be a hero. He takes action, but inadvertently causes the man to shoot his mom, and the Lee Pust, and the other Lee Pust, and now his dad's begging him to stop, but Rick can't. He's being a hero. The robber runs away. Traumatized, Rick tends to his father, who asks him to reach into his jacket and retrieve a ring. As his father recalls the importance of this heirloom, it slips. Wow, okay, well, he gets it back in the present. He decides he's not worthy of the ring. He tosses it, but it comes right back into his eyes. Suddenly, he hears screaming, gunfire, and animal noises coming from Jill's house. She comes outside, and they chat for a bit. Oh, and her fence is electric, 'cause why not? Then Lance pulls up in his whip, cutting their conversation short. But she does say that Rick could give her a ride sometime. He turns back to look at his car, and well, it's a bicycle, and now it's gone. Jill heads off. Oh, look, some birds. And there they're gone. Back in his room, Rick receives another message from Professor X, but this time it's a video. He says he can help him train, but then the video starts bugging out, and Rick can't make out what he's saying. Something about deleting his internet history. After the call, he gets a pop-up out about a car loan. Great, just what he needs. Rick goes to the bank to get that car loan, but gets denied. He says he really needs this, but the teller says, I missed the part where that's my problem. Classic. At that moment, a gunshot goes off. Someone is robbing the bank, and Rick and as a make a run for the door, but so does there would be robber. The man has trouble opening the door. You know, one of those push-pull moments. The ever-polite Rick helps him. He had the same problem coming, and the bank teller runs up and is upset. Rick claps back, I missed the part where that's my problem. Just as he utters those words, 2 gunshots go off outside. Rick runs outside to find a crowd huddled around someone, but that someone was a very talented monkey. Relief washes over him until he spots Uncle Albert collapse on the road. Rick runs over, and Albert delivers the famous line, you know something about responsibility. I don't know, I don't. Remember, the paramedics arrive, and it appears he'll live another day. Meanwhile, Mr. Landers is looking worse, for where his Vodo signs are all out of whack. Then his assistant pulls up. Awesome, just what he needed. He grabs her and zaps her life force. Rejuvenated Lou enjoys his power. Before remembering he's got to deal with the body, he stuffs in the cabinet. But just then the janitor walks in. That's a little Susie, he thinks to himself. Back to Rick after visiting his uncle in the hospital. He runs it to Professor Xavier, who, as we know, can read minds. He proves it to Rick by having him think of a number, but then Rick goes ahead and says it out loud. The professor thinks to himself, they don't pay me enough for this. Professor X takes Rick to a school for gifted children. We see lots of wacky mutants along the way, and even some classic ones. We continue our tour around Xavier's school as he switches out his wheelchair for something more comfortable. Wow, okay, the professor tells Rick he has the potential to be the best of them all, but Rick says he can't even fly, though apparently once he learns the true nature of heroism, he will, whatever that means. Then Rick and Professor X run into the professor's wife. She believes Xavier has been up to no good. She grabs at the air, but really, it's Invisible Girl, who she found in Xavier's room. The wife beats her up, then brings out their children to shame the professor. I can't believe you did this, especially since they just had a new baby. But Xavier thinks it isn't his. The baby uses its telekinetic powers to launch him away. Yep, got to be his. With Xavier gone, rip in peace, his wife steps in. She reveals to Rick that the key to being a superhero is making a costume. Makes sense. He gets straight to it, doodling away a number of designs, some good, some bad, and some we just won't talk about. At last, he finishes up, and just as Trey walks in, he's very impressed with the suit, especially how Rick managed to make the fabric breathable and even see through a weight he didn't. Now blind and unable to breathe, Rick collapses. By the time night comes around, he's made the necessary adjustments and is about to perch menacingly on a gargoyle. Hey, this is that guy's usual spot they agree to share, but actually, this is kind of weird. Then they're chatting about their powers. This guy can light himself on fire, but wait, that means he's on fire. The man collapses in pain as Rick gets the fire extinguisher. That's not how you or whatever. Moving on, Rick gets a job and newspaper place supplying photos of Dragonfly. His boss notes that these pictures are almost like Dragonfly is the one taking them, but Rick proves the contrary. Very nice. Suddenly, someone pops in to report on a police standoff at the university. Rick disappears, and both men are left flabbergasted at the university. The supervillain Hourglass makes a first appearance, aka Lou Landers. He's there to steal some Celium, which he needs to stay alive. However, Dragonfly is here to save the day. But after a strong punch, he must pause to stare lovingly at Jill, who's also there. He gets back to it with our